Michael Pittman and George Pickens just missed out on our top 20 wide receivers, while Stephon Diggs and Keenan Allen are absolutely buried deep in our rankings. We have our wide receiver rankings part 2 episode on today's Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are getting so close to the season, and I know so many of you have your fantasy drafts coming up, whether it be this weekend, next weekend. But we got to get you prepared. So we are going through all of our positional rankings this week. We've already hit on quarterbacks, running backs. We did our first episode of wide receivers yesterday when we hit on wide receivers 1 through 20. We're going to finish up the rest of our wide receiver rankings on today's show. But before we get to that, if you are new here, I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. If you don't know my work, I am a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. And when I'm not doing this, I'm covering fantasy, NFL, and betting for sportingnews.com. You can check out a lot of my articles there, getting you ready for your fantasy drafts here. So excited to do that. And I'll have my start sit weekly column there as well. So we'll get you covered all throughout the season as well here on Locked On Fantasy Football. So not just preseason prep, but we'll help you dominate with the waiver wire and all that good stuff throughout the season.
Yes. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So again, if you missed our wide receivers 1 through 20 and you're confused why we're not starting with the top tier guys, go back and listen to yesterday's episode, and you'll hear all about those top guys being drafted at the wide receiver position. Now, moving on to wide receivers 20 and beyond, right? So where we left off yesterday, I finished with Tank Dell and Nico Collins, and you also had Collins right there towards the end as well. Now, I'll say you are higher on Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, and DK Metcalf than I am. We're kind of close on Pittman, but you have Pittman through Metcalf as your wide receiver 20 through 22. So those are your top 3 guys after those top tiers we talked about yesterday. Tell me especially why you're higher on DJ Moore and DK Metcalf, because I have DK at wide receiver 27, DJ Moore all the way down at wide receiver 33. So you're definitely much more confident in them than I am.
Yeah, DJ Moore just got paid. He's clearly the number one here. And Keenan Allen, I think you look at his presence, I don't know what you're going to get from him. He's just worn down, and he's going to be in the slot, and he wasn't reliable to stay healthy. And then you look at Rome Odunze on this team. Rome Odunze we'll talk about later, the rookie first rounder right there with Caleb Williams. Now, Caleb Williams has given me more confidence that I want more parts of this Bears offense. I think there's going to be more opportunities. They're going to be pass-centric, I think. DeAndre Swift was acquired, I think, more for his receiving skills. They're not going to pound the ball like we've seen in the past. They're going to spread the field, so you're going to have more Allen and Odunze on the field, quite a bit here for Shane Waldron on most downs. I know there's been some talk about Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet, but I think they're more interchangeable. I don't think they're going to be on the field at the same time. You're going to see a lot of 3 receiver sets. DJ Moore is the alpha. Let's just not joke around here. Like, he is the guy. I mean, he kind of commands the ball now. I think that turned there with Justin Fields. He's going to do it again with a young quarterback this year. I just don't trust Keenan Allen to stay healthy, and I think this offense is going to go a lot through those 2 guys, Moore and Odunze, making some big plays, stretching the field. So the guy that I would fade hard in this Bears offense is Allen. I don't want any part of him. He's old. He's slower. I think he's there just to help them in these sets, and he's going to make some catches, but he's not going to get nearly the volume we've seen, his dominant volume with the Chargers. So I think DJ Moore, this is based on talent. I think I always kind of undervalue his talent. It really came to the forefront last year in a different offense. This is going to be pass friendlier with a better quarterback. So I like DJ Moore bumping up. Even though it seems like there's a crowd in targets, I think there's going to be a drop off from Moore, Odunze, Allen, and you're not going to see as much from the tight ends and Swift.
So my thing with Moore is that last year we just saw him be hyper targeted, and those were the games that he succeeded. In the games where he saw fewer than 9 targets, which 9 targets is a lot of targets to see in any game, But in the games he saw fewer than 9 targets, that was 9 games last year, he averaged 9.3 fantasy points per game. I just don't see him getting upwards of double-digit targets per game with a rookie quarterback with all the weapons there. Like, he was fighting with Darnell Mooney and Tyler Scott last year for wide receiver targets. Completely different. That's why I don't like DJ Moore's value, but I like Rome Odunze later because he doesn't need as many targets to succeed. Now, with Michael Pittman, we both have him pretty high. So you have him wide receiver 20. I have him wide receiver 22. We're pretty similar here. Now, his ADP is around there. So it's not like we're saying he's just like amazing value. But I do really like Michael Pittman. I especially like him in full PPR leagues. Half PPR, that's why a little bit down. If it was full PPR, I would bump him up a little bit. He finishes a wide receiver 15 overall last year in half PPR, wide receiver 19. He was fourth in the league, or fourth among wide receivers in receptions last season, behind only CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill. Like, and he'll be heavily involved. It all comes down to these touchdowns, right? If he can have a career year in touchdowns, he's going to destroy our ranking where we have him. Like, if he could score 8 touchdowns, easily a top 20 wide receiver. It's just those touchdowns have not come for him.
Yeah, I'm very confused because his body says he should be scoring touchdowns, but it's weird they don't maybe use him that way. I think they try to force him in maybe into the AJ Brown role, who's a little bit having to stretch the field, partly because they don't have consistency, right? I mean, Alec Pierce has not been good. A.D. Mitchell is trying to get his feet wet in this offense. They might have to throw a lot in the middle of the field to Josh Downs and their tight ends. So this is more of the possession offense, and it's kind of weird. They got Mitchell and Pierce to try to stretch the field a little bit better and use Anthony Richardson's deep arm, but I think that's not the way they score, and I think there's going to be a lot of touchdowns from Richardson and Jonathan Taylor in the red zone. So Pittman almost has to be involved in the red zone because he's not a field stretcher, and they don't seem to throw that way to him. So he might be just tapering off right where he was, and he's dropped a little bit from his finish last year to me because of having a few more viable targets here for Richardson. I think he'll spread the ball around a little bit more. And now DJ Moore, I think I've also factored in this. I mean, he was way up there. He was a wide receiver 1 last year, and I've moved him all the way down to wide receiver 2. So just to make that clear that I have factored in these targets maybe being lessened, but you also have to factor in there's a quarterback who's more accurate who'll get him the ball with fewer targets this year in Caleb Williams. I think he's going to be a big improvement throwing over Justin Fields. And just like with Richardson and Pittman, I think puts them around the same spot here with their receiving competition.
Very fair. Now, with George Pickens, we've been talking him up all offseason long, but neither of us were brave enough to put him inside our top 20 on yesterday's show. I have him at wide receiver 23. You have him at wide receiver 25. We're very close. He's in our tier 4 wide receivers for both of us. But why are you getting scared off because it's preseason? Because I will say I am. I mean, the Steelers offense is looking atrocious. It's looking exactly like they looked last year. Now, maybe Arthur Smith's not showing his cards. Maybe they'll be better, but that offensive line looks very scary right now. They are not gelled. Broderick Jones, the left tackle or right tackle, wherever they're going to put him, they keep changing things up. Is looking scary, scary bad in his second season. I don't know if the quarterbacks are going to have time to target Pickens down the field. So that's why I'm a little bit lower, but he still should be the top target by far in this offense.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, Michelle. Like, I like the player so much, but Arthur Smith and the way the quarterbacks have performed here, and that he's a little bit field stretching dependent. I know that's Russell Wilson's strength, right? They want to run, pound, and throw downfield. That's kind of what you're going to expect, but we also have the history of Drake London, a similar type receiver, not the same speed as Pickens, but he was still the big number 1 target, and he underwhelmed in Arthur Smith's offense. So just adjusting for the things around George Pickens. Love the talent. He could easily outshoot that performance, but keep in mind he was a wide receiver 3 last year. So this is bumping him up quite a bit. This is still giving him a nice thing. And that's what people kind of forget is that we're still adjusting these guys based on where they finished last year, either up or down the board. So again, that's what you have to do. You have to see where they were last year. Are they going to go up and down? And that's kind of how I figure out my rankings.
Yeah, I'll say with two other guys here that we have in our tier 4, tier 5, we're different on just kind of switch here. I have Zay Flowers at wide receiver 24 in tier 4. You have him at wide receiver 28, so not too different in the actual ranking, but down in your tier 5. And then for Terry McLaurin, you're up on him at wide receiver 24 in tier 4, and I have him down at wide receiver 30 in tier 5. I've been talking up Zay Flowers. Listen, like wide receiver 25 is nothing crazy. And he finished pretty close to that last year as a rookie without like dominating for the majority of the year. But he started to come on second half of the year, averaged 17.3 points per game in weeks 12 through 18, had 5 receiving touchdowns over the last 7 games played, including the playoffs. I think he's going to be heavily involved in this offense, and I like him to be a second year breakout. That's why I have him a little bit higher. And I'm targeting him in leagues. With Terry McLaurin, he does the same thing every year. 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. Like that's what he's going to give you. And I don't really care for that. And that's I have him at wide receiver 30. He finished as wide receiver 33 last year. I don't see it being that different.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at some of the other guys in relation to that. You have DK Metcalf. They're behind Zay Flowers. That's notable. I have DK Metcalf ahead of Jalen Waddle and Terry McLaurin there. So that's an interesting change. I do have Flowers down at 28. So not much of a difference overall with Flowers. I think I'm a little bit worried about the touchdowns there. I think I'm not worried about the touchdowns of McLaurin. I think this is going to be a big year for McLaurin. I think it's actually going to be a big year for the Commanders. So I'm just going to call it right now. They just have this new vibe around them. Jaden Daniels just changes everything. And look, Cliff Kingsbury have brought up the DeAndre Hopkins comparison. When you have a veteran number one, that rookie quarterback's going to throw to him. I mean, what's going to happen here with Jahan Dotson? Do we really trust him next? And keep in mind, Luke McCaffrey replaces Curtis Samuel. He's a rookie. We're still trying to figure out tight end between Zach Ertz and Ben Snutt. So when you look at that situation, McLaurin is going to dominate targets. Talk about a guy getting a gazillion targets from his quarterback. He's been really, I'll just use it lightly, screwed a little bit by Sam Howell not targeting him well. Then you had these other guys, Taylor Heineke, put up some really dangerous balls up there. And come on, this is a guy who needed a quarterback, and he finally has one. I think you're going to see that transformation here with Terry McLaurin. So I have always liked this guy's talent, and I think it comes to fruition because he has a guy that finally will get him the ball in high leverage situations.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if he can have a career year in receiving touchdowns with a rookie quarterback that's mobile. I don't know. That seems like a far fetch to me, but we have some other players we do agree on, and we'll get into Rashee Rice, who we're starting to climb back up on. We were high on him to begin the offseason, cool down because man, it was kind of a brutal offseason for him. But moving back up as we get closer to fantasy drafts, we'll hit on that right after our quick break. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can get images of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. I can say I've used this app 1 gazillion times, and all of these things are very, very true. It's so easy to use, and it truly just takes the guessing work out of buying tickets. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON. NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. To get into our tier 5 here, right at the top, I have Rashee Rice, and I'm moving up on him. I don't know, maybe he belongs in the tier 4 with the likes of DK Metcalf and, the Zay Flowers and the George Pickens, because I think he could have a huge season in targets this year with the Chiefs. And it doesn't seem like he's going to get suspended, right? At least this season. That might fall into next season. He was the wide receiver 10 at fantasy points per game from weeks 12 through 18 last year when he finally started to be on the field consistently. So I think maybe we're overlooking him, and like his targets aren't going to be deep. He's going to need a lot of targets, but I think he's going to get them in this offense.
Yeah, I've had a tough time because I was just assuming Rashee Rice was going to be suspended. Now that he's not, how do you work him back in the mix? Especially at the same time, two other developments have happened. Xavier Worthy's looked fantastic in the preseason. I know he's a field stretcher, a little bit different than Marquise Brown has been hurt, but he's coming back at some point. So what do I do with these three receivers now? I mean, Rashee Rice had to dominate targets because there's no one else at wide receivers. Basically him and Travis Kelce. So what do you do now there's two legitimate guys? I'd like to see maybe this Chiefs wide receiver room be cleaned up a bit, right? Get rid of the Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore. I don't want to see any of these other guys touch the field or Justin Watson. So maybe the final cuts will give us a little clarity on what their roles are, right? I think Worthy can be a little bit more than just a field stretcher. I think there's that ability. So it's very confusing to me with the Chiefs receivers at this point. I'm not even sure they know how the pecking order is going to go with all these guys, right? Because Rice has not been consistent and reliable there off the field. You've had Brown not reliable on the field. So Xavier Worthy has been the consistent guy there from wire to wire. Will Patrick Mahomes trustworthy enough and just say, I'm going to pivot because I'm a big play passer and I want to go here? So what I would do is take a shot on all three. Somebody's going to pay off big time as your wide receiver 3. I think you take Rice first, but then not long after you look at Worthy and Brown. Hey, they're playing with Mahomes. One of them or two of them could actually be very productive this season.
Yeah, I would be fine with going in with Rice and Worthy just because of how different of players they are. Worthy's going to be that big play, chunk play. You don't need a ton of targets for him to succeed in any given week, and you can get him much later. Rice, I think, is going to have a good 130 targets this year. It just depends on how much they use him around the goal line, which I think they are. Like, he's going to be a big goal line back too. I think they're going to try to kind of use him in the Deebo Samuel mold there.
Yeah.
Now, there's 5 older veteran wide receivers that we have ranked pretty much like identical to each other, all within the wide receiver 29 to wide receiver like 35-ish range. And it's Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, Deontay Johnson, Stephon Diggs, and Keenan Allen. Now, my order of these guys starts with Christian Kirk at wide receiver 29, Deontay at wide receiver 31, Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 32, Diggs at wide receiver 34, and Allen all the way down at wide receiver 38. Yours is Ridley at the top of this group at 29, Kirk at 30, Deontay at 33, Diggs at 34, and Allen at 35. So let's start here with Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley, because I think these are two guys we actually kind of really want on our team. So Christian Kirk, again, this is a guy I've been talking about, but we've seen him be a top 12 wide receiver with Trevor Lawrence just like 1 year removed. And without Calvin Ridley there, it was in 2022. Christian Kirk finished as a wide receiver 12 in fantasy with Trevor Lawrence. He had a career year with 1,100 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. Like, I think he's going to be the top guy in this offense in targets, maybe not receiving yards or touchdowns, but in targets. So I like Christian Kirk, especially in PPR leagues.
Yeah, to me, these are the guys, Calvin Ridley with the highest ceiling and Christian Kirk with the highest floor in this group. That's quite simply how I put them in there. And I'm a ceiling guy for most of the time over floor, so that's why I have Ridley over Kirk. I think this could be a big year. Watch out for Will Levis and this passing offense. They're much improved. The line is better. The weapons are better. Total 180 from what this team was last year. Forget about the Titans in 2023 with Derrick Henry. That is an old version of the Titans, right? So there's an opportunity here with DeAndre Hopkins hurt for Calvin Ridley to be that alpha we thought he could be with the Jaguars, instead of being just a big play dependent, like inconsistent top target there for Lawrence. And that's the reason I think they moved on from him, because they were disappointed in that. So the Titans, I think you look at Ridley, he has a chance to dominate targets. Kirk could do that as well, along with Evan Ingram there, that offense. So I like Ridley and Kirk. Now, Deontay Johnson, I think, could be the new Adam Thielen here for Bryce Young, except it's a little bit better passing game. So not too exciting, but I think he'll be consistent. Now, two guys I think I'm out on, Michelle, and I think you might be too. I don't want any part of Diggs and Allen. I think they're just slowing down. You can see it. I think people are worried about Diggs versus Tank Dell. Don't. I mean, Diggs is not Diggs. He proved that in the second half of last season. Allen can barely stay on the field at this point. He's just too old. Like, he's played a lot and he's been hurt big time in the past. So I have no interest in either of those guys. I just put them in the rankings somewhere because they had to be there.
Yeah, same with me. Like, Stephon Diggs has been such a volume receiver. Like, he's been great for fantasy because the volume he's been getting with the Bills. He's just not going to get that volume with the Texans.
No.
Now, maybe he scored, if he scores 8 touchdowns, I'm not going to be that shocked in the Texans offense. And that's how he can overcome his rankings. But those targets are going to go way down. Keenan Allen, it seems like he's kind of struggling right now. I don't know. People are talking about his weight. We'll see. I don't know. I just don't want any part of that. Now, 3 guys who are much more exciting, but it's hard to kind of get them too high in your rankings because you don't know how they're going to be utilized. And it's 2 guys we talked about, Rome Odunze and Xavier Worthy. And then also Jayden Reed, Jayden Reed for the Packers going into his second season was a guy that we started this offseason very, very high on. But I think we're cooling off a little bit because we don't know how he's going to be used. I have him as my wide receiver 35. I do have him in the tier 5. So again, Rashee Rice is at the top there in my tier 5. Jayden Reed is at the bottom. You have Jayden Reed lower at wide receiver 36 here. So 1 spot lower than me, but you actually have him in tier 7. Your tiers are a little bit smaller than mine that you feel comfortable with. I do think Jayden Reed, though, has a super high ceiling. It's just, how often will he be on the field if they just have 2 wide receiver sets? That's my worry.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern here because Dontavian Wicks has had a good preseason. You've got Christian Watson doing something to try to fix his hamstring for good. So if that works, his weird procedure, then he's not going to get hurt with the soft tissue and be out there. And it could totally be great. And he has a huge ceiling and he starts scoring touchdowns again and make big plays here, or he could just get hurt, right? That could just happen. So there's so many different outcomes for these guys. It's kind of like the Chief situation, but a lot scarier because I don't know how the pecking order is going to play out. And we've heard reports of all these guys doing well, these young receivers, the tight ends. So I don't know how it will play out. Was Reed more valued because Watson was out? Is it going to be more of a spread it around passing game that Jordan Love has a year of starting under his belt? So there are a lot of questions. And I love Jayden Reed. I like the concept of Jayden Reed, but the situation is not, unfortunately, in his favor at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird because the second half of last season, he was so good, right? Weeks 10 through 18, he was the wide receiver 10 in fantasy points per game. He led the Packers in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns and rushing touchdowns from weeks 8 through 18. So it's like, why wouldn't they use him? He looked really good. I still have hopes for him, and he's going late enough. I'm willing to take a chance on him, but I'm not as high on him as I was to start the offseason. Now, Rome Odunze is flying up draft boards. I did a mock draft yesterday. He went in the 7th round. This wasn't like 7th round. So he's been having 10th round ADP. It's flying up after these preseason games and everything coming out of training camp. So I don't know if I'm willing to pay up for a 7th round pick with Rome Odunze, but I do think he can have some really nice games this year. Like, I think he's going to have blow up games because of his big play ability. And I think overall it's going to be inconsistent, but I do think at the end of the season, his overall finish will be pretty solid. You have him at wide receiver 39. I have him at wide receiver 36. It's probably too low, right? He has such a higher ceiling than that, especially if one of Moore or Keenan Allen get injured.
Yeah, the more and more we're talking, first of all, we do have Odunze above market right now. I've seen him a lot in the wide receiver 40-50 range, and there's probably some people thinking exactly like that drafter, like 7th round, he's got a lot of upside. But just be careful. I think you draft him as a wide receiver 3. Allen is still there, so he could be annoying in that sense. But again, I think it's going to be a lot of more in Odunze for this offense as the primary playmakers here for Caleb Williams. So again, I have him just outside the wide receiver 3s. You do too. Maybe the answer is just take him ahead of Keenan Allen and call it a day here and don't worry about Keenan Allen. And that's, I think, where you have to look at. But I wouldn't go too aggressive. I mean, keep in mind, 7th round is very, very rich. You still have to draft him, I think, as a wide receiver 3 based on the situation.
I'll say with Xavier Worthy, we already hit on him. We like taking a shot on him late. He's both of our wide receiver 37s. You do like Worthy a little bit more than Odunze. You have him 2 spots higher. I like Odunze more than Worthy. It's 1 spot higher. They both have great ceilings this year. In our final segment, we're going to finish up our wide receiver rankings. We have some players finishing up the top 50 that are different from each other that are in our top 50s, but they are in the others. So we'll hit on some of those discussions to finish up today's show.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and we've talked a lot about FanDuel because it's America's #1 sportsbook, and we want you to get in on the action now while it's about to get hot here in the NFL. We're very close, just a couple weeks away from the regular season. We still have preseason action. There's a lot of things you can look at with player props and all that good stuff, so check it out. While you do that, there's something a little bit different for you to motivate you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So you can get on the action, just put down $5, and you'll get to check out all your fantasy and betting plays in action there for the first few weeks of the season. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to download America's #1 sportsbook today. All right, let's look at the fringe wide receivers just outside the wide receiver 3 ranking. That means outside the top 36 in most 12-team leagues. We're thinking more half-point PPR when we look at these rankings. Now, let's start with a guy that we haven't really talked about, and really a team that we haven't talked about all that much here, is the Seahawks, except when we did the Seahawks show. But when you look at Jackson Smith-Njigba, I don't know what to do with him either. He's another confusing guy to me because in one sense, everyone says Geno Smith is going to be unleashed as this elite quarterback. In another sense, it's Geno Smith, and could he be ending his bridge run here? So I don't know what to expect here of the Seahawks offense. It's totally new with Ryan Grubb. Wide receiver 39 for JSN for Michelle. Wide receiver 45. Explain what you think we're going to get out of JSN this year, Michelle.
Yeah, so JSN is going as wide receiver 45 on average. So I do have him ranked higher than consensus does. I think he can have a really nice year. I think this is one of those options you can take later in your draft that has the option to break out. I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba coming out of school in Ohio State was an excellent prospect. Like, he was my top wide receiver in last year's draft. The issue is he went to a very crowded team with, the play calling wasn't great last year. Tyler Lockett was used way too much. He was the highest targeted guy on the Seahawks. That should not happen again, especially now that they change offensive system. I'm excited to see what they can do under Grubb now as the new OC there, and what he did with Washington. Hopefully you have those deep shots to JSN, because they used him so short last year. It was all short. That's not JSN's game. Like, use him down the field more, use him intermediate. And he just didn't get to play a ton of snaps last season. 200 fewer snaps than both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. I expect him to be on the field more. I expect him to get way more targets. And I think he can really break out because of the talent this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use an old school movie reference for you. And whenever there's an old wide receiver and a younger wide receiver, and Michelle, I don't know if you're a Godfather fan, but I'm a big one, but you leave the gun and you take the cannoli. So the gun is Tyler Lockett here, and the cannoli here is JSN. Just take the younger guy in this situation, because I think you're going to see a transition there. There's a good parallel actually between the University of Washington, where they had those 3 receivers last year, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, and of course Rome Odunze. I think you're going to see DK Metcalf in that kind of Odunze big play role. I think you'll see JSN kind of a hybrid of those other 2 roles. So I think he's going to take over from Lockett. Lockett's had a great run, great productive receiver, but they drafted JSN as a direct replacement for him. Now in another situation here, are these all guns, or are they all cannolis here? Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, and Keon Coleman. Based on situation alone, I was excited about all these 3. Now I have cooled off quite a bit. I mean, Christian Kirk is not going anywhere as a key target. This Chargers passing game without Justin Herbert has looked bad. They're going to be run heavy. And Keon Coleman, he hasn't done anything to really stand out here that I've seen or heard. So are you in on these guys? How would you order them, Michelle?
I am in on Brian Thomas Jr., and I'm getting slightly in on Ladd McConkey. I will say I have this tier 6, and I want a couple guys from this tier later in my draft. So the tier 6 of mine starts at wide receiver 36, and it goes Rome Odunze, Xavier Worthy, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jordan Addison, Brian Thomas Jr., and I did put Ladd McConkey in there, but Keon Coleman's a little bit further down at wide receiver 46. The thing with Ladd McConkey is I it seems like everyone out of camp is saying he's the clear cut guy. This is the guy they wanted. This is the guy they were looking at when they drafted him 34th overall. He's going to be the top target, I think, in this offense and play that Keenan Allen role. It's just how fast can Justin Herbert get back and be healthy? But if Herbert's not able to run and scramble around, he's going to be getting that ball quickly. And I think McConkey is going to get a ton of targets. We'll see what he can do with those targets. So I am getting a little bit higher on him. And with Brian Thomas Jr., I think Christian Kirk can lead the team, lead the Jaguars in targets, and Brian Thomas can still be very good. He's not one of those guys that needs a ton of targets because of what he can do with chunk plays. Also, the role that Calvin Ridley is leaving is that red zone role. He led the team by far with 26 red zone targets last year. So Ridley had 16 more red zone targets than any other player on the Jaguars. I think that's where Brian Thomas can shine. He scored 17 touchdowns last year with LSU. He's a big bodied guy. I think he can come through with those touchdowns and those big chunk plays. So I'm fine with taking Brian Thomas Jr. late as well. Keon Coleman, yeah, I think they're trying to push him into that Stephon Diggs role. Yeah. And I don't know if it's going to work with the Bills there.
Yeah, this is pretty simple. I have McConkey ahead of Thomas, but this is also half-point PPR. Like, if it is standard, I might lean toward Thomas, right? He's the big play guy and the touchdown guy. If I'm going PPR, you got to go McConkey because he's going to get a lot of volume and targets that are short, not always exciting and productive to stretch the field. As Michelle mentioned, it could be difficult here to push the ball downfield in this run-heavy Chargers offense. Now, an interesting game we've talked about quite a bit is Rashid Shaheed. We don't like Derek Carr, and we've gone on record saying this multiple times. I think Saints fans probably like him even less based on what they've been booing in the preseason. But we do like Rashid Shaheed and his connection with him. You am at 44. I'm at 50. Shaheed is buried in the rankings well below this, but he's a big playmaker. Again, big play dependent, but they can use him in a little versatile role as well with the speed and the Debo role and the Clint Kubiak 49ers-like offense. So something to keep in mind. They need playmakers, right? Juwan Johnson is hurting. I think you could see a lot of Taysom Hill and Rashid Shaheed used to manufacture some offense here after Alvin Kamara.
Absolutely. I think he's going to take a big third-year leap this year. He already was second on the Saints last year in receiving yards and first in receiving touchdowns. I think they're going to need to utilize him, especially now that they got rid of Michael Thomas. He's going to be on the field more. I'm excited to see what he can do. And our rankings don't seem like we're super excited about him, but we still do. I mean, his average draft position is at wide receiver 57. So we're still well above consensus, and we really like to take him where he's going in drafts. Now, I have 3 guys in my top 50 that you do not have listed in there. It's Mike Williams, Josh Downs, and Jalen Polk. Jalen Polk just made it in as my wide receiver 50. But with Josh Downs, he just has to get healthy. His hype this offseason was huge. He has to get healthy. I think he'll get the targets. He'll be on the field a lot. He'll be the wide receiver 2 there. That's why I have him in the low 40s in my rankings. Mike Williams, on the other hand, has a way higher ceiling than where I have him at wide receiver 40, 49. Like, I think that's actually disrespectful to have him that low. You don't have him in your top 50 at all, but he's been the wide receiver 16 in fantasy points per game over the last 3 seasons. He's scored more than Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, and Amari Cooper in average points per game over the last 3 seasons. He gets it done when he's on the field. Now he has to stay on the field. But if that happens, he's going to be the deep threat for Aaron Rodgers. He's already back at practice. I expect him. He's probably going to be a top 30 wide receiver this year. It's hard to trust him, but that's how I have it. And then lastly with Jalen Polk here, it's just another rookie I'm taking a chance on that could be the top wide receiver for his offense. And with Jacoby Brissett, I know it hasn't been pretty this preseason, but he'll be able to get him the ball. Definitely a guy you're going to have to be patient with, and that's why I'm at wide receiver 50. But I think towards the second half of the year, he could really break out.
Yeah, Mike Williams, this is how it goes with Mike Williams. He's either an awesome big play wide receiver and he's scoring, or he's not on the field and he's hurt. So however you land on that side of the coin is where you should draft him. I'm just going to say that. Like, I like the concept, again, of Mike Williams. He could have had a big career if he had stayed on the field, but the injuries just scare me. It's always an injury with him. So that's where I'm at with him. He's a little bit older now, so it'll be harder to recover. Now, I'll give you my 3 that you're not having in your top 50. I'll start with the other 2. Jameson Williams, more of a dart throw. He can make some big plays. We'll see. there with the Lions. Again, this could be it if we don't see like big improvement with his big playability. He's got some upside. That's why I put him there. DeAndre Hopkins, again, we'll see. I think it could be a transition there. If he stays hurt, Treylon Burks could end up being in the number 2, but this also makes you feel a little bit better about Calvin Ridley. Now, the last one is the most interesting one to me. I had this guy not anywhere near my top 50. But I saw Bo Nix take the field, and I started to have some confidence that he's going to make Cortland Sutton his dude all over the field. I know Tim Patrick made plays, Marvin Mims made plays, but there's something going on between Nix and Sutton that we didn't have. It was advertised. Sutton and Russell Wilson were going to make this happen. I finally kind of saw it. Like, he's looking for Sutton a lot. Now that Nix is the starting quarterback, I actually feel better than if it was Jarrett Stidham or Zach Wilson. This kid looks pretty competent, Michelle. I think he's going to have a lot of good targets to Cortland Sutton. He's a rookie, so that means who's he going to go to? He's going to go to a reliable veteran a lot with targets. So Cortland Sutton could be a sneaky pick here now that we actually have maybe some promise at quarterback in Denver.
Oh, I'm so off of Cortland Sutton. I mean, all of Bo
Trying to
Nix's
sell him.
all of Bo Nix's throws are short, right? And that's the Sean Payton system. That doesn't fit Cortland Sutton's style at all. He's not good at he's not a guy that's going to destroy you after the catch. He's
got
that
size though. I mean,
he's that deep threat that can make those insane plays. He scored 10 touchdowns last year with Russell Wilson. We act like Russell Wilson stunk or something. 10 touchdowns with Russell Wilson and still was a wide receiver 35 overall. I'm completely out on Cortland Sutton. I have him buried. And then with Hopkins, he's dealing with an injury right now. He's 32 years old. The only games he did anything last year were when he was like so much volume, right? He averaged 14.8 points per game in the 6th game with 10 plus targets. Only 8.8 points per game in the games he had fewer than 10, the 11 games he had fewer than 10 targets last year. And that includes his massive game where he had the 3 touchdowns. With the first week of Will Levis. Like, that was a game he had fewer than 10 targets. That's how little he did in the other 10 games with fewer than 10 targets. So I'm out on Hopkins and Sutton. If I was going to take a chance on any of your guys that you have in the top 50 that I don't, it would be Jamison Williams, just because we know the talent he had coming out of school. It hasn't come to fruition, but he's in a good offense. He can get it done. It's just, I don't really know what's going on with him.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Maybe we'll have a weird competition looking at these 3 guys versus the other 3 guys, see who ends up scoring the most. So we'll have that as a little side thing that we look at all season long. But these are deep shots you're taking in your draft. I mean, they could pay off. They could not pan out. If they pan out, great. If they don't, just cut them, move on. And that's the beauty of taking these guys late. So that's our show, Michelle. That takes care of the wide receivers. We'll look at tight ends tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, as Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow, like you said, talking about the tight end position to finish up our rankings. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.